Welcome to the Two Guys in a Cooler channel. Today we're going to be making pancetta. So if you're into charcuterie, or if you're just getting started making salami and sausages, or if you just want to see something kind of cool, this is the video to watch. We're going to be starting with the cure. So we're going to be taking a pork belly, curing it with some herbs and spices, and then we're going to prepare it for the drying chamber to get it ready for that delicious Italian-style bacon. So in order to make pancetta, you need to get pork belly. Hopefully now you have a relationship with your butcher. If you don't, start one. Your butcher can be your best friend when you're into charcuterie, and he can get you all kinds of really great cuts that you could use to cure and make all kinds of wonderful products with. So in my case, I got a pork belly. Normally I would get one, get a pig, trim it down, and I didn't feel like doing all that stuff. So I went ahead and had my butcher get it for me and trim it up for me. Now, notice mine's right here, roughly about, what's that, about 1.5 inches, give or take. And the weight of your pig is going to determine how thick your pork belly is. So if you have a 350-pound hog, 400-pound hog, you're going to have a relatively thick pork belly. Now, normally, right here in this little section, there's a flap of meat that separates, and it's kind of right up against the rib cage. So when you pull that rib back, you're going to have this flap of meat. I trim that off, and I try to trim up as much as I can from the belly to keep it as uniform as possible. And what I'm looking for is a rectangle, right? Now, all of my trimmings I save, and I turn that into sausage later. So I try to get my belly to be roughly about the same thickness throughout, and then a rectangular shape. Now, all I'm doing right now is I'm going to go ahead and put a little apple cider vinegar right on top of it. Just give it a little rub down, and what this is going to do, this is going to help clean it up as it's coming from the butcher. It's going to help disinfect it and get it ready for the cure. So once I rub that apple cider vinegar both on the front and the back, I'm going to go ahead and just rinse it off in some cold water and then pat it dry. And so there we go. Now that's where I'm at right now. And so our next step is to go ahead and weigh this pork belly. The kind of cure that we're going to be using to make this pancetta is something called the equilibrium cure. And if you've watched any of our other salumi videos, the whole muscle videos, the equilibrium cure is a cure that I particularly prefer because you can get really exact, precise measurements. You can have repeatable results, and you don't have to worry about over curing or over salting your product. And I really love that. And so what I do is that everything is in percentages, and it's all based off of weight. And as you can see, there we go. At the very end, I'm going to crush up some juniper berries and some bay leaf, and that's what my cure is going to look like. So if I'm putting in, 2.5% salt, it's going to be 2.5% based off of the weight of the meat. And then same thing with each one of the ingredients. But if you have any questions, let me know. All right, let's move on. So what we're doing here is we're taking that seasoning and just making sure that we're rubbing it really, really thoroughly on the front and the back of this pork belly. Now, I decided to have the skin removed, but traditionally the skin is left on, and when they hang it, they don't wrap it in anything. And so it's left with the skin on, and that skin gives it that protection. But in my case, I removed the skin, and we're going to go ahead and wrap it in a casing so that we can hang it later. All right, so here's what we did. I went ahead and really rubbed in heavy duty, like I really pressed those seasonings into that pork belly. I now have it in a vacuum seal bag. You can use a Ziploc bag. Vacuum seal is a little better. And what you want to do is you want to determine the thickness of the piece of meat. And so let me show you a particular program that I like to use that you can use as well. It's called the Brine Calculator. So look at those 3 tabs. The tab on the right is brining time, and this is really what you want to do. You want to type in the thickness of your pork belly, put it in inches or centimeters, and then go ahead and click whether it's tubular or whether it's flat, and that's it. 2.8 days. So that's all it takes. In order to cure this pork belly, it needs 2.8 days. But if you have COPA, you can click tubular, and it'll tell you how long to cure that for. And so we're going to go ahead and pop it in the fridge. All right. I forgot about it 2.8 days later, and now it's 2 weeks later. And so we want to go ahead and get it ready for the curing chamber. So it is completely finished curing. It's not going to get any saltier the longer that I leave it in there, which is a great benefit of the equilibrium cure. And the first thing I'm doing here is preparing my Penicillium nalgiavensis. It's a completely optional step, but it's definitely one that's going to help protect against unwanted bacteria. It's called Mold 600. And all they did was mix it with a little bit of dextrose and a little bit of water, and I am in business. I've taken my cured belly out of the fridge. I've taken the vacuum seal bag off of it, and now I'm going to go ahead and rinse it off. I've rinsed it off with cold water, and some white wine. And so that now I got all the bay leaf and all this extra seasonings off, and you can see definitely the color of the mussel has changed. And so what we're going to do now, this is totally optional. We're going to liberally sprinkle cracked pepper all over the inside of the belly. And I don't know if you know this, but pepper is an antibacterial and an antifungal. And so that's also going to help in the protection of any unwanted mold or bacteria that grows inside that might want to grow inside. So here's really the most important thing when it comes to making pancetta, especially if you're making pancetta arrotolata, which means rolled. There are basically three types of pancetta: pancetta arrotolata, pancetta steccata, and pancetta tesa. Now, tesa just simply means flat, much like you would hang bacon. Arrotolata means rolled, which is what we're doing now. And steccata means pressed, much like you would see a soppressata, something like that. And so the most critical element is the very first roll when you're making pancetta. You really, really, really want to make sure that that first piece is tucked in to the roll itself. If there's a gap between that first fold and the belly, imagine this: there's going to be a layer of oxygen that's going to be basically drying with your salami. That's going to create a really hospitable environment for unwanted bacteria. You definitely don't want that. So pay special attention to that first roll, that first fold. Get it as tight, as tight, as tight as you can. And once you have it as tight as you can, you're going to go ahead with, some butcher's twine. Go ahead and do a couple butcher's knots just to keep your pancetta in place. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to stuff it inside of a synthetic casing. And this step was absolutely ridiculous. Like, I'm telling you, if you have a beef bung, that's probably the way to go. I ended up using a synthetic casing, and it was a little, you'll see here in a second. And so let's take a look at that crease one last time up close. What I ended up doing was I trimmed the sides. All right. So now my front end and my back end, I trimmed it right down the middle, and I cleaned it up really good. And that first crease right in the middle is the one we want to make sure that is really tight. And so that's what it should look like once you have it all nice and rolled up. It shouldn't have any gaping holes. And once we put it in that really tight casing, it's going to help to secure it even more. And so what I want to make sure is I want to make sure that my synthetic casing is a little smaller than my pancetta itself. And so this proved to be quite a challenging task, putting this casing on. And I honestly, I didn't think it was going to fit. And I know I say that every time if you watch my videos, because it seems like these whole mussels are just so much bigger than the casing. But this little casing took a beating, and I'm telling you, I wasn't gingerly with it at all. I actually was relatively rough and was able to get that casing on pretty good. You could see what we're talking about. As I'm rolling it up, I'm releasing the butcher's knots that I tied, and I'm removing the string. And so, see, I just got my hands right in that little lip and just very slowly, very patiently working that pancetta into that casing. And as you can see, it's in there tight, which is exactly what I want. It's going to really help that pancetta come together. And so as we're pulling that casing down, notice that we've got that pancetta just about on lock. We're pulling that casing up. And at this point, all we're going to do is we're just going to release any of the excess casing. And we're going to get it in there as tight as possible. So notice I got a little air at the bottom, right there in that bottom section. And I'm going to sterilize my pricker and go ahead and poke that, and check this out. There we go. So when your whole mussel is in your, at least in your synthetic casing, this will also work for beef bungs, and you start to prick it, that casing is going to want to adhere to that meat. And that's going to really help create a bond between your casing and your whole mussel. That's going to keep out any oxygen, any unwanted bacteria. So typically people get all kinds of nasty bugs when there's a lot of air pockets, between their casing and their whole mussel. And so that's why you want to try to get it in there as tight as possible. But this is what it's going to look like. I can already tell you this pancetta is going to be absolutely beautiful. She's long. She's got a lot of flavor. She's got that, pepper crust on the inside. The seasoning mixture is going to be spectacular. It's going to have a little bit of bite to it. And finally, I'm going to go ahead and apply that. You remember that Penicillium nalgiavensis, that mold 600? We're liberally brushing it onto the entire casing right now. And that's going to help that mold, that white mold, grow and spread quickly. And it's just going to cover that entire pancetta really pretty. Now, you do need to be aware that when it comes to pancetta, because it is so fatty, that mold isn't going to grow so well initially on the fatty sections. So if you see your mold growing kind of splotchy a little bit, don't be concerned. Totally normal. Eventually, it's going to take over the whole thing. And so there you have it. That's how to cure and get your pancetta ready for the drying chamber. And stay tuned because the next video, we're going to talk about what percentage of weight loss you want to dry it to, depending on whether or not you're going to eat it raw or you're going to use it as an ingredient in other dinners. But this particular chamber is currently at 55 degrees Fahrenheit and 80% humidity. And I'm going to keep it like that for probably about 60 to 90 days, depending on how long it takes her to dry. Stay tuned for the next video. Thanks for watching this one. If you got any questions, leave them in the comment section below. And if you're new, consider subscribing. We're going to post new videos every week on charcuterie, on cooking, on knives. We're about to start a series on our adventures in Latin America, which is crazy, and I want you to be a part of it. So thanks a lot. We'll see you soon. Talk to you later.